Okay, it's 6:05, we'll get going. So good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight for the premiere of our new ID Action Lab Perspective series. My name is Dennis Weil, and I'm the Dean of the Institute of Design, also called ID. And it is my pleasure to introduce you to our guest speaker tonight, artist Carolina Caycedo, who, through her studio and practice and fieldwork, works on the front line of social and environmental justice. We are very grateful that Carolina is joining us tonight. Carolina describes her work as art in action and uses facilitation and participatory processes to leverage networks and relationships to build more responsible and cooperative futures. I strongly encourage all of you, if you haven't yet, to visit her current exhibition at the MCA, the Museum of Contemporary Art in Chicago, named From the Bottom of the River. It is open until August 8th. It shows her work with the riverside communities in her home native country of Colombia, who are being impacted by large-scale infrastructure projects. It was actually during my visit in April to the MCA that I encountered Carolina's work, and I was struck by the parallels between her art in action approach and ID's interest in design in action. And this is what led to this exchange and conversation as the first public event of the ID's new Action Lab. Our director of the Action Lab, Professor Carlos Teixeira, and Caro Silva, a 2022 Master of Design candidate, will be joining the conversation as well. I would also like to express our thanks to the MCA for the partnership, and specifically the MCA curator Carla Aceveda Yates, who was the curator for the show, who was our partner in organizing this event, together with Kristen Geeken from ID, who leads our content and influence. So again, Carolina, we are very excited about having you join. We look forward to your thoughts and to the conversation. And it is my pleasure to now hand over to Caro, who is acting as the facilitator for tonight's event. Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis. Hello, everyone. My name is Caro Silva. Quick things about me. I have a background in psychology. I worked as a researcher, and I'm currently an ID student. I'd like to welcome again Carolina Caycedo. We look forward to hearing more about your work in a few minutes. I'd like to give everyone an overview of our agenda tonight. First, we will listen to Carolina Caycedo. Then I'll introduce our ID faculty member, who is also the Action Lab director. After that, Carolina, our faculty member, and I will have a quick discussion. And at the end, we will have time for Q&A. We already have some questions you submitted, but I will still be checking your questions in the chat. Now I'll hand it over to Carolina.
Gracias, Caro. Thank you. Thank you, Dennis, for this kind invitation. Thank you, Carlos and Rochelle and Christine for taking care of the details. I'm very excited. Thanks to Carla, that's in the public too. I'm speaking from Cauca, Colombia, which is Nasa and Misak territory, two of the strongest indigenous groups here in Colombia, who have a tremendous political organization. I always feel so inspired of coming to these territories and learning and absorbing from their indigenous knowledge and their political will. Some of you may know that we've been 2 months into a national strike. I think 2 days ago, 2 months of a national strike here in Colombia, led mainly by youth, young people in the front lines, primera línea, students also, of course, some union workers groups, and it's amazing what has happened. We've managed to topple a health reform, a tax reform, bring a much needed police reform, not the level that we would like to, but you know, there's a start. So remember to take the streets when you want a change. I'm going to share and talk mainly about the exhibition that's up at the MCA. It's up until August 8th, if I'm not wrong. It's called From the Bottom of the River. Let me share my screen. And I will start by telling you a little bit about, okay, I just want to make sure that my slides are, you're seeing the change of the slides. Yes, Caro, can you let me know? But I can't see you, have to talk.
Yes, I can see them. Let's go.
Thank you. Great. So in 2014, I read an article on Indie Media, actually, that said that the Magdalena River was not letting itself be diverted to construct this large dam in its upper body. And it really struck me when I read this article, you know, starting with the title that was referring to the river in first person, something or someone with agency, you know, not letting itself being diverted. And I started doing research and looking up what was going on with the construction of El Quimbo Dam, which you can see in the image while it was in construction. It happened that the person who wrote the article is here in the house with me. He came to visit, or they came to visit. Jonathan Luna is someone I knew. I learned that they had written the article, so I got in touch, and they invited me to visit the region of Huila, Colombia, in southern Colombia. So I visited it for the first time in 2012. Started filming, started doing field work, and in 2014, I had the chance to move and live in the territory for over half a year. And in that process, together with Jonathan and with a group of youth organizers called Aguas por el Territorio, we facilitated a series of workshops that would reinforce the use of the body as a political tool in the region. So when I arrived to Huila, there was already a political resistance opposing the construction of the dam. This is the second dam on the Magdalena River, and it's part of a larger master plan of development for the river, which entails 17 dams on its upper and middle body. And then on its lower body, it entails the dredging and kind of converting the river into a hydro highway or hydroway. So big boats can come in and extract and take out, you know, all the oil and other minerals that will be extracted or that they're planned to extract. So I encountered a community that was already in resistance. Here's, for example, an image of small members, like a small group of the community that were taking turns to blockade this entry to the construction site. You can see they had their children, it's intergenerational, all ages were there, you know, blocking the site with their banners and whatnot. And they were using already their bodies as political tools by putting them on the front line, blocking the roads or blocking the construction site, sometimes even more than 30 days at a time, or doing processes, what is called here liberación de la madre tierra, like liberating Mother Earth, which is taking over plots of land that had been purchased by the company building the dam in Enel, which is an Italian Spanish company. The particularities of this dam also is that it's the first dam constructed by transnational corporation in Colombia. Before it had been national corporations. So I encountered already an organization that was politically conscious, sophisticated also in their direct actions, and using their body as a political tool to reclaim better compensation and to stop the dam or slow its process as much as possible. So in this context, together with Aguas, this group of youth, we started offering workshops to reinforce that the use of the body in direct action, but with a creative twist. So muralism was something that's been like, it's really deeply rooted in the community, but we started teaching how to use cameras and other audiovisual equipment. So the community itself could learn how to tell their own stories, social cartography, theater of the oppressed, contemporary dance, performance art, puppetry. These are some of the outcomes of the puppetry workshop, where actually the fishing net, which you can see several of the sculptures in the exhibition are made with artisanal fishing net. This was actually the first time, or the first way that we used the fishing net was to create this kind of collective puppets. And this is actually portraying the Moan, which is a folk character who was being displaced by the dam, right? That's why the Moan is crying, because he lost his location. And the workshops were kind of generative workshops. The kind of culmination were a series of direct actions in public space. Sometimes or the majority of times when we think about public space, we refer to the street, to the plaza, to the corner, to the urban setting. But for me, it was important to understand that there's public space in rurality too, and that rivers, bodies of water, are public spaces. In the Colombian Constitution is actually a common good that pertains to all the Colombianas and Colombianos. So we were really trying to make emphasis in the river as a public space, as a common good. So here you can see some of the images of those final actions, where we would also use our bodies to imprint living messages over the territory. And you will hear me say territory a number of times today. And the use of the word territory is very important, and it's used in a very particular way here in Colombia. And we say our body is our first territory, right? Understanding that our bodies are connected to the land, to the place where we come from, that the land is an extension of our body, and that our connection to that land, to that territory, implies the spiritual, the political, the cultural, the economic, the social. All these aspects are entailed in the conception of a territory. It's very close to how indigenous peoples here in North America, how they use the word land, right? And it implies the forest, the mountains, the rivers, the sea, the oceans, right? These are some actions that we did, imprinting these living messages, like Yuma resiste. Yuma is the indigenous name of the river. At this part of the river, it has different names because it's a very long river, the Magdalena River, or right in Ríos Vivos, which means living rivers. It's kind of also sending a very direct message, right? That these landscapes, which I say, with a hint of irony, and I will come to that later, are not empty landscapes, that there's actually a tremendous set of relationships happening in these territories. And that, we use that view from above, the drone, right, to capture these living messages as a way to hack precisely that view of power, that view from above, that militaristic view that many investors have over our territories. So all these series of actions happened in 2014. After that, my relationship with the communities who continued their struggle has, continued, has developed, has transformed, has iterated in different ways. But let's say that half a year or more was a tremendous foundation for all this body of work that I call Be Damned. And that you can see very important pieces of that body of work and of the different series that conform Be Damned in the show at the MCA. Be Damned, of course, is written with the two M's. It's a play of words that speaks about the damming, the controlling of a body of water, but also the damming as in a maldición, as in a curse of sorts, right? Understanding extractivism and development at that scale as a curse for many people who are on the end part of that extraction. So here I will start showing some views of the exhibition. This is the entrance. This is kind of the view you have when you come into the exhibition. This first piece that you see here is part of a series called Cosmatarrayas. They are made with artisanal fishing nets that have been given to me by members of the community or that have been weaved under specific instructions by commission, or that I have sourced at local markets too. So they come from different sources. For me, the atarrayas or cast nets are beautiful pieces of, ancestral technology. They conjure and they bring together the knowledge of weaving, the knowledge of the river, of the fish, of where the fish like to hang out, of the currents of the river, but they also stand for economic autonomy and they stand for food sovereignty. So the atarraya, since I first started visiting the territory, has been a fascinating object. It just symbolizes so many things, and they're so beautiful as objects. They have given me a pleasure in the studio that I've never found before with an object itself. So I bring the atarraya, and I always say that the cosmatarrayas are a meeting point between the work I do with the community and my studio work. That's where those two parallel bodies of work kind of come together. And I kind of give myself freedom as an artist to explore with color and form and to play in the construction of these sculptures, because the atarraya, the castnet itself, already is so strong in all that symbolism that I told you before. I always say that our societies would work much better if they function like a castnet instead of a dam, right? Our societies work more like dams, like cutting the flow of community organization, cutting us, restricting us in so many ways. Instead, that atarraya is a structure that is malleable, porous, that captures the sustenance, but let the water flow by it, that when it breaks or it tears with a rock or a stick, it doesn't compromise the functionality of the whole object. It can be repaired, right? How well our societies would work if they were like that: porous, malleable, adaptable, repairable. This one in particular is called limen. It's meant to be installed in liminal spaces, so in entrances, in porches. And it is basically a spell to protect the spaces that they guard. I always think about the cosmatarrayas and art making as spells, as changes of narrative. I think we do live under an authoritarian spell, and art is definitely a way that can help us break those oppressive and authoritarian spells. Under the vision of Carla, we decided to also include some pieces that are not from the Be Damned body of work that started in 2012, but that are previous, but that can show some of the lines that kind of weave together other bodies of work and that traverse, my whole production. One of those series is this one that you read in the Banner series. The first one says, "Christ is a means to govern, trust each other," that makes a twist on the dollar bill motto, "In God we trust." And the last one says, "Ni Dios, ni patrón, ni marido," neither God, neither boss, neither husband. And they're, of course, political statements and invitations to action. I like to think about the Banner series as objects that have an exhibition life, but that can be taken out of the museum and exhibition spaces and exist in other direct action moments or in the street, or can be hanged out in the street. I've always used text also as a very direct way to communicate ideas. So the Banner series kind of let us talk about that. These is 3 cosmatarrayas. I want to focus precisely in this one that's called Undammed, because it definitely kind of grounds the whole body of work in a very personal experience. So when I started researching about dams construction in Colombia and in Latin America, I started thinking about what are the dams that I have myself, that we all have. The first dam is kind of a self-imposed one, is the not speaking up. remain in silent when we see something that bothers us, or when we see injustice, we shut up. That's kind of the first and foremost dam that we self-impose. But then I kept on thinking about what are the dams in my body, and I arrived to the conclusion that the copper T or IUD that a doctor had inserted in my uterus after having my first child was a dam itself. And I proceeded to remove it, and it's incorporated in this cosmatarraya, which is colon dammed. And I needed to include the IUD as a way to ground it on a personal experience, the whole research, but also to bring up the conversation about how infrastructure looks on a human level. We always think about infrastructures as, if we think about a dam, that's something monumental that is far from us, is out there, outside of the city, or this bridge is kind of removed, or either very close to our everyday experience or very removed, right? But we seldom think about how infrastructure looks on a human scale. And we actually have infrastructure inside of us, like the IUDs. These are also, these 3 panels of clothes that you see here, also a series called The Woman in Me, Mujeres en Mí. It's also not part of the B-Dam series, but an important ongoing series. You will see that a lot of my work has an ongoing nature. So these are panels constructed with clothes from women in my family, or women identified people in my family, and women identified or feminized bodies, colleagues from the art world, curators and artists in Latin America, or Latinx artists, Latinx identify working in North America, Canada, or the US. And for me, it's a way to build my own historiography, understanding that my personal life and my work life, if you wish, are very much entangled. And they are constructed in a way that they can be weared. So they're very much inspired in the Parangolés of Elio Oiticica, who is a Brazilian artist. And they have embroidered names of female and feminized and femme artists from older generations, right? So it's a work that brings different temporalities together and different histories, and it's kind of my own personal feminine history, as I find that history and art history in general, it has been dominated by white male narratives. So this is a way to subvert that in a very personal way. This is an example of how they have been activated. This is in the MASPI Museum in Sao Paulo, activated by women from the movement of people affected by dams in Brazil, and also the movement of people without housing in Sao Paulo. In an exhibition called Feminist History. So here you can see we unmounted the panels and used them, and there was some reading involved, and also some honoring some of the women who have been killed for their activism. And this, like Marielle Franco, that many of you may be familiar with her history, a political activist from Rio de Janeiro. And this brings me to this other piece that's called My Feminine Lineage of Environmental Struggle. It's a collection of portraits, also printed on this fabric that can be used as a banner of sorts, if you wish. It's an invitation to carry it. We had plans for some performances as part of the checklist, but unfortunately COVID prevented us of that. Here you can see some of the original portraits actually installed on Lina Bobardi's easels that are amazing pieces of design and museography. And these are portraits of environmentalists across the world who have inspired me, or that I want to learn more about, and I take the occasion of portraying them as a way to learn and study their actions and their life and their struggles. So you have women from all parts of the world in this collection of portraits. A lot of them have been killed for their activism, such as Berta Cáceres in Honduras, or have been or are threatened, like Francia Marquez, an Afro-Colombian leader here, who is won the Goldman Environmental Prize, as well as Berta Cáceres, and has been threatened and is risking her life basically for being in the front lines of environmental justice. For me, I understand these pieces and most of all the banner also as a pedagogical tool for people to learn about these women. One of the two video installations of the exhibition is this one. It's one of the first pieces of the Be Damned body of work, called Spaniards named her Magdalena, but natives have always called her Yuma. It's a very personal statement too, about rivers, dams, and it's a very early, let's say, analogy of how I understand dams operating in a very similar way as other mechanisms of social control, more specifically police, riot police formation and responses to protests. Here you can see, for me, one of the most beautiful and important pieces of the whole Be Dam, which is the Serpent River book. The Serpent River book is a publication. Let me see what's the next here. Oh, let me focus on these two little pieces here, which actually give the name to the show. So this piece is called From the Bottom of the River, Desde el Fondo del Río. They are two hand-blown pieces of glass covered by small artisanally made fishing nets. And they are meant to portray two eyes that look back at you. You know, for me, they represent that nature, you know, nature as a political entity that has agency. If you think about a river that overflows and that inundates, or if you think about an earthquake, we understand that nature has the agency to change the course of events. And in that sense, it is a political agent with rights. These represent that nature that look back at us, that is looking back at us as a way to hold ourselves accountable. It also represents the number of bodies, unfortunately, that inhabit our Latin American rivers. You know, Colombia specifically has gone through decades of a very violent armed conflict, and bodies end up in the bottom of the river. So it's also talking about that violence that is perpetrated not only against social bodies, but also natural bodies and natural entities. But ultimately, I think the piece also conjures what I want. The objective I have with my art is that people start to see and to look differently, right? It's the idea to change a narrative, and the invitation for the audience to change their perspective and to reevaluate their relationship with nature, right? So inviting the people to position themselves in the bottom of the river, to take into account non-human epistemologies, right? How does a fish look? How does it see? What is the perspective of the fish? What is the perspective of that dead body? What is the perspective of that rock that has been tousled around the currents for hundreds of years in the bottom of the river, right? And to leave that egocentric, human-centric notion that, that kind of reigns in the Anthropocene, if you wish. These pieces, let me focus on these drawings, handmade drawings that are bounded as an accordion fold, are called the river books. They reinforce that idea of the rivers as entities with a soul and with a story to tell. They are also designed thinking about younger audiences, right? They take and get inspiration from children's books. So they're very easy text written in first person. Basically, the rivers are telling their own stories. And these actually books then gave way to the Serpent River book that I had mentioned before. The Serpent River book is this meandering publication. It's designed in a way that it has these folds. You can see here, and these pleats that when you fold them in a way, it creates these meanders in a way of a river. It has like 5 different chapters that respond to the river parts: its source, upper body, middle body, lower body, and then a mouth, or an encounter of waters. And these different chapters respond to the different perspectives that you can have over the territory, right? The indigenous perspective, the more campesino or mestizo perspective, the extractive perspective, when that extractivism goes wrong. So you see images like this one, the satellite view of the construction of a dam, and then ultimately, what are the efforts the community is doing to kind of resist that extractive process in their territory. I'm just showing you these images, or this image is as a different installation view when we actually build a table but install it directly on the floor. If you know, or if you see in different exhibitions where my work is showcased, you see that I'm very flexible in showing the work. I like to think about my work as open-ended, that can adapt to spaces and that can adapt to context as needed. I don't want to produce works that are solid monuments that cannot be altered or changed. I prefer to think about them as open-ended and changeable and kind of evolving in time. This is one of my favorite views of the exhibition. I think Carla, with the help of Carla, we achieved something very beautiful, and it's this conversation, this visual conversation in between pieces, between the Serpent River book, this back mural that kind of dominates that back part. It's called Yuma Land of Friends, and it's a mural that is done by combining different satellite imagery of different moments of the construction of El Quimbo Dam. Again, that the use of the satellite image, or the kind of the subverting the use of the satellite image that in this kind of infrastructure constructions is used to clarify and to show investors the progression of their investment, of the construction of the certain dam or bridge or mine or whatever you have. Instead, here, by remixing different temporalities of the construction, including a satellite image of the dam filled up, I'm trying to subvert and actually complicate and muddle that territory and actually give it the complexity and the depth that it really deserves. I think it also speaks beautifully to this water portrait of the San Gabriel River in Southern California, where I live now. Let me see a close up. So these pieces printed on fabric is part of a series called The Water Portraits. I specifically decided to use the term portrait to be critical about the word landscape. I always think that landscape is a very problematic word in the sense that it has allowed for artists to be complicit in processes of colonization and of colonization of natural spaces specifically. If you think about the two formats that we have in arts, we have the portrait that is more vertical, and then we have the landscape that's a more horizontal format, right? And you think about the landscape is kind of this window through which we observe nature, right? But by the process of this observation and capturing landscape or nature through this landscape format, we are positioning ourselves outside of the natural environment when we're actually totally immersed in the middle of that set of relationships that happen within a territory, right? So in that sense, I decided that I needed to portray these bodies of water instead of representing them through a landscape format. And that's why they have this elongated and kind of more narrative outcomes. They're also inspired on, kind of the visions you have also when you take indigenous medicine, when you take any sort of indigenous medicine, herbal or mineral. When you have visions in Colombia, we call that we paint that we paint, que pintamos, you know. Sometimes you paint, sometimes you don't paint. But when you paint, the visions you have are so amazing. So, you know, the water portraits are certainly inspired in those paintings produced by Medicine. And with this, maybe I want to speak about this particular net, the yellow one. This one is called Oshun. It's dedicated to the Oshun or Yoruba deity Oshun, who is the goddess of the fresh waters. Her color is yellow. She likes everything golden. You know, she helps people find gold in the riverbeds. She helps fisher folk fish and have good fish seasons. And she likes everything sweet, like honey and rum. So you put in the altars honey and rum to honor Oshun. So you see the different fishing nets have different kind of stories behind them, different cosmatarrayas. I wanted to share, to finish my intervention, a small excerpt, 3 minutes of the video Apparitions, which is the other video installation in the show, and with collaboration of a group of choreographers and dancers in LA. Here in the photo, you see Samad Guerra, and one of the main choreographers, Marina Magallanes. We've been collaborating since 2017, actually. They have helped me, for example, activate the Serpent River book in amazing choreographies. And this piece was a collaboration in the Huntington Library, Gardens and Art Museum in San Marino, California, very close to Los Angeles. I was in residency there in 2017, and they invited me to, you know, to produce a work after being in residency and being able to research there. And the Huntington is a place that was built over the collection and the fortune of Mr. Huntington, who brought the railroad to Southern California, also planted all those iconic palm trees in LA. Of course, he has amazing resources, or the collection has amazing resources, but it's a very white space in all its senses, very constructed, very designed with a Western perspective, right? And as a brown woman, immigrant woman, my presence there was, you know, I felt very troubled. And you know, they have an amazing collection of all issues about water in Southern California. My first temptation was to, you know, do something about that. But then I said, no, I need to address the brown, black, queer, Asian bodies that have built this place up. And I need to conjure and cast this place. So I invited the dancers to activate the fishing nets and activate the space. Thinking that they are these bodies that constructed this place up, and kind of bringing them as to hunt the Huntington. And just want to say that one of the instructions to the dancers was to return the gaze very intentionally to the camera, as a way to not be consumed by that white audience that I know visits the Huntington, as a way to hold accountable that audience. And of course, this is, you know, very related to From the Bottom of the River, from that piece of the two eyes. And you will see, I will let it run for 3 minutes, but even the trees of the Huntington are looking back at us through the camera lens. guess I want to say too that, you know, the Huntington has this great library where many great researchers go to do their work, to write books and articles and academic papers. You know, you have all this knowledge contained in those bookshelves. And I must say that, you know, for me, and that's something that I'm unlearning in my own process of decolonization, that I've been learning, is that our bodies are sources of knowledge too. And that normally that source of knowledge, you know, that ancestral and accumulated knowledge that we carry in our bodies have been stigmatized, and it's time for it to let it flourish as a way to climb out of this climate collapse that we find ourselves in. So I'm going to stop sharing, open it up to Carlos and Caro. Thanks so much for your attention.
Thank you, Carolina, for sharing with us. Again, I would like to encourage everyone to go and visit the Museum of Contemporary Art, where you can get to see Carolina's work in person. Now, I would like to introduce our amazing faculty member, Carlos Teixeira. Carlos is a professor at the Institute of Design and the director of the Action Lab. Welcome, Carlos. Please, I would like you to speak briefly before we get into our discussion with Carolina about the Action Lab and the work that you have been doing.
Thank you, Carol. Thank you, Carolina. I really appreciate your work, and I'm fascinated. The more I learn, the more I get fascinated about your work. Welcome all the audience, and I'm Carlos Teixeira. I'm a faculty member at the Institute of Design. I'm also the director of the PhD program, and also the director of the newly created lab, the Action Lab at the Institute of Design. I'm from Brazil, so I'm very excited that we have here representatives from South America and Latin America that allows us to bring new perspectives into the conversations of design, art, and issues related to sustainability, to social inclusion, social justice, and so forth. So nice to have a more shared in different perspectives in this group here. Regarding the Action Lab, in the Action Lab, we believe that our contemporary challenges of equity and sustainability are structural and systemic, and they exist in several sectors. So it's not just an isolated issue that we can say this is about equity, this is about sustainability. They are embedded in multiple sectors. That's why we need to redesign our most critical infrastructures, because those infrastructures, they have been built on concepts that are not sustainable and not actable. And we are very interested in looking at those most critical infrastructures, such as mobility, health, food, and energy. And actually, energy here is the topic of our conversation today. Although we have been talking a lot about art, about performance, about spirituality, all those things, and the dam as the main focus in the river and the river in itself, I think that what is behind all that is the sector of energy. It has a direct relation on how we consume and how we produce and how we consume energy, and the livelihoods that are shaped around our concept of energy. In the Action Lab, we believe that design can play an important role in prototyping purpose-driven solutions. So if we think about equity and sustainability in the infrastructures of those sectors, such as energy, we need to start thinking about solutions that are driven by purpose, not just by efficiency. And design can be this major practice that can mobilize multiple stakeholders to activate these agendas and this purpose and these solutions. So we decided to invite Carolina because in the Action Lab, we also believe that it should be a new space to bring together multiple disciplines, multiple methods, and multiple practices. And the work of Carolina shows how we need to expand our pool of approaches once we are looking for redesigning our infrastructures in the 21st century. So Carol, thank you for the introduction, and looking forward for our discussion.
Thank you, Carlos. So as you mentioned, we are interested in talking about the approaches to this. So Carolina, you were talking about the extensive research that you've been doing, and this reminds me of the field research that I have done, both in psychology and design research, how we observe and conduct interviews, right? And well, we get to know the subjects better. But could you tell us a little bit more about the method that you use that's called spiritual fieldwork, and how this relates to studying both human and non-human entities?
Yeah, I call my fieldwork spiritual fieldwork to differentiate it from more ethnographic or scientific based fieldwork, where the expert tends to keep a distance or an objective distance of the subject of study, right? And what I want to do through fieldwork is completely the contrary. I want to get closer and closer and actually get involved and develop long-term relationships with what I'm studying or learning from, let's say, both human and non-human. That means establishing a relationship with a place, with the different nuances of that place, like a bend of the river, a particular stone, a particular beach, and with the community that is related to that place. You know, the fact that Jonathan is here visiting today, that we coincided, you know, he came to visit and to accompany another family that he's close to. And my brother lives here, and the fact that, you know, we worked together on this project in 2014 and we still maintain a relationship, a friendship, speaks about that spiritual fieldwork that I'm mentioning. You know, in art we have what we call socially engaged work, and that is work where process and community-based actions are kind of at the core, you know, of the work. And sometimes you have projects that operate as helicopters. You know, they come, they work with the community, and then they go and never come back again for different reasons, right? Precisely of this structural problems that we have in all our disciplines. Sometimes because of lack of funds. I always say that every socially engaged project should have a budget line that for return tickets for the artist or the cultural worker to return and show and share, you know, the results of that work together. Call it a documentary, call it, you know, a sculpture, call it whatever you want. But, you know, it has to do also with long-term commitments to ideas and to those places and to those people whom you take from. You know, if we don't do these or don't strive for these long-term relationships, we can take the risk of falling into academic extractivism, right? So kind of continuing and operating in the same fashion of the same corporations we're criticizing, right? So I always encourage everyone to kind of commit long-term to their ideas. Don't let the quick worlds of the art industry, of design industry, kind of put a pace on your work. Instead, you know, learn to pace yourself, to find your own rhythms, to take your time, to dig deep and root yourself into what you want and where you feel connection.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. I actually was going to get it to you, Carlos. Like, how can we incorporate this technique, and also like how can you think about this in the action lab, and when we try like to shape human actions as well.
And let me say just one more thing, because before giving the space to Carlos. One aspect that's very important of the spiritual fieldwork or the fieldwork is that when I arrive into a community, I always be very transparent of what I can do or what I cannot do as an artist. You know, I have very specific tools and very specific skills. I am not a designer. I am not a communicator. I'm not there to design flyers or posters or anything. but I do want to put those skills and that knowledge I can bring in the service of the community and respond to what is their agenda in place. So that's something that I always strive to do, is first arrive and see and ask for permission first to be there and to learn. And second, what are their needs and what of those needs I can tackle with the skills I have.
I think there are two very interesting aspects from Carolina's work that call a lot of my attention. And for us in the Action Lab, we see as very potential for us to use in rethinking the way that we approach projects. One is, I love it, the approach of spirituality into the work. I think the notion of spirituality is like breaks out the kind of rational, academic, theoretical understanding of something, and start to bring the understanding that there is a certain level of beliefs in the communities that is not just of a single individual, and is not only of that community at that time. It's something that has a long trajectory of beliefs, and whatever happens is always interpreted through those spiritual beliefs, and they are part of a narrative. They are not just like, they are not going to like a dam is not going to change the way that people believe. They are going to incorporate that as part of their history, and they're part of their myth. They're part of understanding how things work. So I think this notion of temporality that allows us to understand that us as designers, we have too much the belief that we come and we do the research and we can come and implement a change. And actually, most of the work that Carolina is showing us is that it doesn't matter what we bring, it's going to be absorbed and reinterpreted and incorporated in ways that is dictated by the spiritual beliefs that are there. So I think this notion of understanding that there are different angles through the interpretation, and we at the Institute of Design, we have a pioneer, and we have a long tradition of thinking of our work about the human-centered design, very focused on the user, the understanding the people, and their activities and their beliefs, but giving very little attention to the notion that not everything is functional, not everything it's cognitive, and a lot it's about the myths and the spiritual understanding that they have been developed on that community. A second aspect that I like a lot about the work from Carolina is the notion of territories, is understanding that things, they happen in a very specific and given context. So a dam is not just a dam is a dam in the context of all those communities that the river is crossing, and the changes and new interaction that is happening in constructing there. It can create, so the notion of the territory is understanding that there are natural elements, that are technological elements, that are social and human elements over there, and all those things are interacting, and they have a unique way of interacting depending on the characteristics of that territory. The contrast that I want to quickly do here, the image that you see behind me, is a recent project that we have done at the Institute of Design in my course on sustainable solutions, that was to think about the microgrid as a civic infrastructure. As a quick context for that image, the microgrid is something that is based on the ability of collecting, producing energy locally, especially if you're doing with renewable energies, and using like solar energy to be able to produce, storage, and distribute energy. And if you can do that locally, then the community can appropriate that production and consumption of energy. And that has much to do about the territory, when the territory set the conditions of how you can produce and consume energy. And it's not something that it's based on a large dam on a very far place that is now producing the energy for other people to consume in an urban setting. So this notion of production consumption of energy and how it relates to the territory is something that if we break away from the model of mass production and mass consumption into the new model of local production, local consumption, then the territory is going to have a major say in the way that we design things. And I think Carolina is just showing how much our practice in design, and she's using art in her work, will depend on our ability of engaging with the territory, engaging with the community, and understanding those relationships so that we can design for that. So for the Action Lab, the notion of activating the relationships in a territory is something that we yet to develop best approaches into that. And Carolina is showing a lot of those ways for us to do that.
Thank you, Carlos. And actually that those topics that you're mentioning, the beliefs, the social and technological elements, also energy, takes me to my next sort of question or topic that I wanted to talk to you both about. Carolina, you did mention about this intrinsic stuff that we cannot separate from ourselves. And I'm thinking about how some people have this belief that technology has become part of us, right? Today, and also at the MCA exhibition, you spoke about the construction of the dams, and you called this infrastructure that is within us, such as the intrauterine birth control device, the IUD. So I would like, Carolina, your opinion on how we humans relate to technology, and also what's the role in technology on your work. And then Carlos, I would like to know your perspective on how designers relate to technology, but also what's the relationship between energy and technology. So I'll hand it over first to Carolina.
Well, I'm through my work, I'm very interested in learning about kind of ancestral technologies. Sometimes we think about technology as something that just makes us look forward to the future, or something yet to be developed, the next thing coming. But actually, there is a lot of indigenous and ancestral and traditional technologies that are so worth to kind of revisit and look at, right? Most of all, if we want to think in terms of just energy transition, right? And I think that's something that Carlos was mentioning in his last intervention, how, you know, if we want to think about an energy transition, we have to avoid what happened with modernity. That was what, you know, this kind of one model is applied to everyone. And that's only perhaps worked in Europe, but when modernity was tried to apply to our countries in Latin America, it was a great collapse and, you know, didn't work at all. And I think, you know, that's why locality and thinking about what are the technologies in a particular place, you know, that have been there for a while, what works for a particular place, right? It's again, that technology tied up to the locale, to the place, to the territory that I'm interested in. Again, I bring the issue of the fishing net, right? Or the object of a fishing net as an artisanal technology, something that's handmade, human scale, right? Again, I don't think that, you know, we have to start thinking about infrastructure in different ways. Sometimes we also think about infrastructure as something that's man-made, but if you think about rivers, that's an infrastructure that we've like lived and like been attracted to as humanity forever, right? So how can we start thinking about the natural world as an infrastructure that we have to take care of too, that we have to repair, that we have to maintain, that we have to tend to, that we have to sustain? And I use this word very particularly instead of, you know, thinking about the term sustainability is a conflictive word for me, right? Because sustainability is keeping the rate of production, of something, right? Doing everything to keep that rate of production. But I don't think that's something we want to pursue, because the rate of production that we have right now is not sustainable. You know, I prefer to think about mechanisms and ways of sustaining, of nurturing, of providing, you know, strength that to something, you know, to take care of something, right? What are the technologies of care? Yeah.
I think that from a design point of view, we have traditionally looked at technology much more in the context of use. So thinking about the technology as at the human scale, where in technology interface with human beings. So even when we get this notion of human computer interaction, or the interfaces, or the services and the touch points, is very much at the human scale, and the interaction that we have with the objects and the things around us that's around. So that's the traditional scale at which designers has thought about the technology. But I would like to think about that technology is one of the components of larger infrastructures. And infrastructures, they happen at multiple levels. They don't happen only at the human scale. So I think that there is a need and a space for designers to expand their view. And the Action Lab, we have been working with this notion of multi-level design. And I think that Carolina also brings that very nice when she looks at the fishing net, but she also looks at the dam. Both those systems are control systems. They are just in very different levels, okay? And they are both control systems of energy, either for fishing and having the nutrition that you need for entire community to survive and eat. But at the same time, when you think about the dam, that's something that's going to control the flow of the water and source that energy and the water in new ways. So the notion of technologies, and one example of the use of technology for control, you can find that at a very micro level with the fishing net, but you can also find that at the macro level with the dam. And those things are all something that they need to be designed, but they are also part of our largest technological systems. One is not independent from the other. The fishing nets are based on the notion that the river will source the fish that I need at that point. And the dams might constrain the use of this technology, and now start to empower other kinds of technologies because we have a dam. So we have to think about those technological systems and the infrastructures that they exist, similar to the example of the IUD that is controlling my body. You have to think that there is an entire health system behind a simple recommendation of how you're going to avoid pregnancy. It's not just that you can have this in isolation. So I think that designers need to start understanding more the technologies from a systemic point of view. And there is this very pressing issue that we need to start thinking from a purpose-driven way, the technology. So how those technologies will build sustainable systems, how they will build actable systems, rather than just building efficient systems for production consumption. So I think those are things that designers are yet to improve in the way that they are working, which is looking at multi-level use of technologies and what are the infrastructures that support that, but also thinking about technologies as something that are not just imposing us ways of doing, but mechanisms and means to an end through which we can start building our infrastructures.
Thank you, Carlos. And actually, I'll go a little bit back to where we were at the beginning now that you're talking about this systemic process. and also this purpose-driven. And I believe that, Carolina, like your work is purpose-driven. And previously we were talking about this spiritual fieldwork, but I think that we will all like to know a little bit more about your methodology and process when studying groups. So I feel that that's something really important for when you're researching the environment and social justice. So I know that you kind of become part of the community, but how does like the process go in terms of like this research until the end, until you get into like translating this knowledge into something visual and communicated?
Well, so as you said, there's a process of researching, doing both field work, spending time with the community, returning. I do a lot of consultation and different kind of maps and territory representation. So, traditional maps to satellite imagery that, let's say, it's kind of a newer technology, if you wish, to also social cartography, so maps made by the community to kind of understand the physical kind of aspect of that territory. I consult, kind of archives, libraries, also documentation centers held by the communities themselves. I conduct a lot of conversations with community members or different stakeholders. So, if I have access to engineers from the dam construction company, politicians who have been outspoken against the dam or are in favor of the dam. So I try to also kind of see who is having conversations about the issue and try to establish a communication and conversation with these people. So I can absorb different perspectives too, and kind of from that builds my own perspective, right? And then there's a process of coming back to the studio and kind of revising all the material. As many of you involved in different kind of projects, you may know that the amount of material you accumulate, at the end, you may use a percentage of it, right? But it's still worth to have all that wealth of knowledge. Without that, it's difficult to weave then, kind of a more honed down and kind of a more specific idea or message you want to bring about. It's also just spending time, right, with the material itself. So revising it, studying it, hearing the conversations over and over, transcribing them, looking at the maps, spending time and experimenting. Right? I think an important part of by art making is also just experimenting. The cosmatarrayas are definitely a product of that experimentation, as well as the water portraits. The water portraits, the process is taking photos and film from the bodies of water I want to portrait, and then coming back to the studio and spending time with them in the computer, remixing those images over and over, layering them. So there's a lot of experimentation and playing in the studio. Yeah, after that process of research. And then, of course, then is the part of also sharing it back with the community itself, right? Going back to the community and sharing. I think an important aspect of my work is, for example, with those satellite images that are not easy or cheap to obtain. For me, it's important that as soon as I obtain a satellite image of the territory of the dam, of the breaking of a dam, the first thing I do is to share it back with the community, because normally that's material that's not very accessible for the community itself, or things that I source from libraries and other kind of academic contexts, if you wish, right? So I also try to bridge and share that material back with the community when I have a chance to do that.
I think in the design field, and especially what we are trying to do in the Action Lab, we can see a lot of parallels between what we do and what Carolina does. And I think that this is a very, how can I say, motivating because we have a lot in common. But I think that there is something here that calls my attention from Carolina, is how much is expanding and the range of things that we do, especially because we have been in design so focused on the human-centered design and seeing the world from the situations and contexts in which people are interacting and using things. And I think that this notion of bringing entire new perspectives from a satellite image into also thinking about social cartography. Just as an example, as Carolina was talking about social cartography, I was just imagining how transferable would be the social cartography for vaccination now. It's like there is so much that we can go about using zip codes or Google Maps and people's address and demographics to know where to find the people that need the kind of vaccines. And we are in the stage where it's very hard. Everybody that wanted to be vaccinated or have the easy access to the vaccination got the vaccination. But there is a whole entire new level of beliefs, of infrastructures and access that cannot be mapped by traditional tools. So I was just thinking about the social cartography as an example that could enhance the way that we can think about those logistics, those access, and those building trust and building messages with communities. So I think there is a range of methodologies that I'm seeing from Carolina's work that goes from how to develop insights from a context, which is not just an extraction. It's not about going there, observing and extracting. There is a deep level of engagement. But I also like a lot the notion of that I would call from a design perspective, which is the generative part, which is the prototyping. And the prototyping that involves the involvement of multiple stakeholders, humans and non-humans, requires performance, requires the constructions and generation of new interpretations and new things. And this is something that has a continuum. It's not something that you can come and do once and leave. So for me, prototyping from a design point of view is something that we have to move away from just a single workshop or a series of workshops and engagement, and start thinking about something that activates the community to start thinking about solutions, to think about ways that they can appropriate the infrastructures for their own agenda. And thinking that as designers engaging for the long term, but by activating their participation. So I think there is a lot in common, but at the same time, I see that the industrial model of designers kind of looking for efficient ways of getting in and out of communities and building solutions and designing solutions. It needs to be to something that are more long-term, participatory, action-oriented, and prototyping that allows us to co-create those infrastructures.
Thank you, Carlos. Thank you, Carolina. I think that right now we're talking about like this previous process, and then I would like to ask you both about like when we translate something into knowledge, but most importantly into action, and like Carolina, you translate like this information into like these exhibitions, right? And I'm thinking about like how this also can relate to empowerment and creating maybe like a cooperative future. So like, I don't know, like, could you talk a little bit more about like these getting impact to others in some way?
Well, yeah, I think I'm going to paraphrase something that I heard 2 days ago. I was in a conversation with Brian Eno. I was like, wow, great, amazing. But he said something very interesting, and is that, you know, there's kind of two ways to understand this world. What is the rational world, right? The rational way, like, with mathematics, with physics, economics. And then we have this other more sensual, spiritual way, right? That is not trying to give explanations and facts about how this world functions, but is actually interpreting how we actually feel and see the world, right? And I think that's the level in which I operate, at least as an artist, and is trying to provide spaces for us to feel more, not, and then for that feeling to then give or be a stepstone towards further thinking or critical thinking, if you wish, right? I think we live, as I said earlier in my talk, in a kind of authoritarian spell, right? A lot of that authoritarian spell is established through images. Actually, we live in a time and moment where images are bombarded to us in many levels, through screens, ads, fake news, one over the other, that at such a rhythm and such a velocity that we've become insensible to many of those violent images, even or stories, right? So to bring back storytelling into a level of solidarity, to the service of justice, of social justice, of environmental, but most important, to the level of an imagination, right? If we can't imagine the world we want, we will never be able to build it or to design it, right? So I think that's where perhaps us artists or novelists or filmmakers or even designers, with prototyping processes, we contribute to that collective imagining of the world we want, or the worlds, let's say, because now we understand that there's just one world. There's so many worlds in this planet, right? So I think that's a big contribution, this level of imagining, right? And contributing to different ways of storytelling that can touch audiences in many ways, right? And kind of move that sensibility that sometimes is left so untouched, or that becomes stones, through all that bombarding of images and ads and craziness. I think just also providing those tools and spaces for imagination is very important right now in our world.
Thank you, Carolina, and I agree. And also, like, I know that we are up to time, and I'll just want to ask you two more questions, guys. One for both of you, and one will be for Carlos. For both of you, the question is, what's the relationship between design, art, and labor production?
You want me to start? Or Carolina?
Carlos, you can go.
Carolina, please.
Okay. Well, it depends on where you look at it, I guess. Though it can be very conflictive, that relationship, So it also depends of the level where you operate, if I'm understanding well the question, right? So maybe I respond from my personal experience, my relationship. I consider myself a cultural worker. And in that sense, I align myself with workers of different stands, union workers, teachers, taxi drivers, right? And in that sense, I also speak from that experience as a cultural worker, or someone that works somehow from a precarious condition, if you wish, right? Also understanding the privileges that I have of being part of, a kind of art industry, if you wish. I think it's an important question to understand what is the relationship. And for us as cultural workers, as people who work with imagination, and that also source the labor and the production work of other people in order to complete our works that are then exhibited or whatnot, also to maintain a level of ethics towards those people who collaborate with us, be it the community or be it fabricators or be it museum installers or be it curators or critics or writers, right? So I hope I responded, if I understood well the question, but yeah, I would say that.
Along the same lines that Carolina, I think that whatever we do, it takes a whole village. And that means that both art, design, and production, we need to have technical experts at the highest level. For you to produce a satellite image, you need the best engineers and the technology most advanced. But at the same time, for you to understand the meaning of those images in a territory, you're going to have to talk to the people that lives in the territory, that has the strong tradition of the beliefs and the spirituality and the myths that they have to interpret those images. And that matters equally to the image that is produced through a satellite. I'm also imagine that for producing a net, a fishing net, is something that requires a very high level expertise and techniques of craft. And this is not everybody in that community that knows how to do that. And at the same time that you're gonna need for the production of those images in the book, you need people that can illustrate and people that can put the book together. So I think there is multiple levels of expertise and they are distributed, but they have to come together in very unique ways. So for me, I have enormous respect for the multiple levels of expertise, of methods, techniques, and approaches that is required to put anything like that together. Can be a design piece, can be an object, can be an entire infrastructure, as I was discussing the project that we worked in terms of thinking about the microgrid as a civic infrastructure. You will need to be able to have electric engineers working with computer scientists, working with the construction workers that would put those systems at home and install that in a way that everybody knows how to use, and technicians that can repair and maintain those infrastructures. So I think that I was go back to what I said. I think the relationship here is that it takes a village, and everybody should be recognized with the credits for the capacity of producing those amazing infrastructures.
Thank you both. Thank you, Carlos. I just wanted to open up if any of you have any last words that you wanted to share with the audience, either Carolina or Carlos, because we will wrap up in 1 minute.
Let me go first and Carolina can finish. She's the protagonist today. So I just want to thank the audience for participating in this event. And I hope you enjoyed the discussion. Our main goal here was primarily for us to bring a perspective that we think that is missing a lot in the design practice, a perspective that it brings a point of view that makes art and design, the making, the engagement. And I'm very proud to the fact that we also could bring the unique voice of Latin America to the discussion of a sector like energy. So when we are discussing the future of energy, the production, consumption, climate change, and the use of renewable energy, I think that we need to consider that different parts of the world has a lot to say and contribute to that discussion. And bringing the work from Carolina, from South America, and in the Action Lab, we would like to have those kind of discussions. We receive a lot of students from South America, and we want them to feel that they have a space and opportunity to engage in those communities. And thanks for the Museum of Contemporary Art to open the space for that discussion. So I will pass to Carolina to the last word.
I would like to thank you also, the audience, for participating. I encourage you to learn more about fair energy transition movements in Latin America. There's a huge movement of local community-driven energy transition initiatives across the continent. So I encourage you to look at it and study them, be inspired by them, and also join any environmental group you have close if you haven't, take action by engaging with the closest you have, and what affects you. Sometimes we look for ideas outside of our world or something very complex, and sometimes that is immediately around us is the major source of inspiration because it touches us personally. And that's definitely the place to start, changing the world.
Thank you, Carolina. Thank you, Carlos. Thank you for your message. I really love just what you said. Thank you, everyone, for coming. And I will also like to let you know that we have another event coming up called Shapeshifters from Blank to Design. You can register to this event through our website. It will take place the 14th of July, noon Central Time. Thank you, everyone, and good night.
Good night.